Greetings, ladies and gentlefish, and that's something we haven't heard in a while, let's be honest. Hello, welcome. Firstly, the obvious new mic, yay! Hopefully, it's a bit better than the old one, which was frankly terrible. So yeah, by all means, comment on the sound quality. I think this is going to be quite a bit louder than the old one I was using, so it might be that you have to tweak the settings you have used to listen to some of my videos before. Not that I imagine many of you have done so, because it's been a while. So just as a reminder for anybody who had forgotten or assumed I stopped existing or just wasn't aware, back in February of this year, which is now 7.5 months ago, I said I wouldn't be putting videos out for a little while because we were going to be moving house. We were in the process of buying our second home, and that might take a couple of months to, go through, sort things out, get our stuff moved, get utilities set up, all that good stuff. And so I was just pre-warning people that it might be a couple of months. Yes. We were living, to borrow a Pratchettism, in interesting times, and things have not gone according to plan. So I'm not planning to labour this too much, but I was gonna give you a quick rundown of why I haven't been around. So originally, when I made that video, the plan was that we would exchange contracts and it would be finalised, the house move, toward the end of February, maybe getting into early March. Our completion date ended up being delayed a total of 4 times. So it was, that's 5 different completion dates. And that's just the tip of the iceberg, unfortunately. So February was when you last heard from me. March, the whole completion date thing is still going on. They're still getting delayed. And toward the tail end of March, my mum also fell ill. So for anyone who isn't aware, my family still live in the south of England. I live in the north of England. So it's like, I know if you live in the States or Australia, it's not probably a horrendous amount of journey time or drive by your standards, but it's still a good sort of 6 to 9 hour drive, depending on how many breaks you take and whether you're on your own or whether you have a small person and all that jazz. But to go and see my parents. So, my mum fell ill late March. So April rolls around. April is when I had originally planned to take some time off in order to move the house. Because of all the delays in the completion date, one of the delays being on the completion date itself, it meant that I then had 2 weeks that I couldn't actually do that with, because by the time they'd delayed one of the completion dates, leave had already started, so I couldn't really rebook it. And as it turned out, my mum had actually been quite badly ill, was taken to hospital. So I ended up using a good chunk of that holiday to travel down to see my parents and to help my dad look after my mum for a bit. Ultimately, we were able to complete contracts on the house, and we exchanged contracts in April. Fine. So, but my mum was still quite badly ill. She was let out of hospital and went home, but like I say, I went to spend some of my holiday to go down and help look after her. So then May rolls around. Beginning of May, myself and Loki find out that Loki's pregnant. Hurrah! Frabjous Day! By the end of May, it becomes apparent that something's gone quite badly wrong. So we thought it was a miscarriage. It actually ended up being an ectopic pregnancy, for anyone who's not aware what that is, because whilst I did know what it was, I didn't really know a lot of the ins and outs before it happened to us. An ectopic pregnancy is where the fertilized egg latches outside of the womb, essentially, usually in a fallopian tube. What that means in practice is it's kind of like a miscarriage, except you have to have medical intervention to stop the mother bleeding to death. So Loki ended up being scheduled for surgery. This was found out, by the way, because of a trainee doctor who was decided to just check things just in case. So massive shout out to that particular trainee doctor. Quite possibly she literally saved Loki's life. Because as it turned out, as Loki was going into the operating theatre, the pregnancy was rupturing and she was starting to bleed. Which could have ended very poorly. So, also in all this, I've forgotten, in April, if we just rewind a moment, Loki lost one of her elderly relatives and her uncle suddenly died of a heart attack. So, as it turned out, her uncle's funeral was due to be at the beginning of June, and as it turned out, that clashed with Loki's operation for the ectopic pregnancy, so not only was she in theatre having surgery, it also meant we couldn't go to her uncle's funeral. And so that's how June kicked itself off. I'm not going to dwell. I was going to say something, but no, I'm not going to dwell on it. It's just weird. We've had this conversation since. It's weird when you turn around and say, effectively you've lost a child. That's a strange statement. Anyway, so that's how June started. The rest of June goes by relatively normally, I suppose. And then July rolls around, and first couple of weeks, fine, no big problems. And then mid-July, my mum dies. So I said she had been ill. As it turns out, what actually killed her was nothing really to do with why she'd been ill. It was just something that can happen during old age, but unfortunately it wasn't going quietly into that good night. And my dad, who was with her at the time, ended up trying to resuscitate her, unsuccessfully, obviously. As it turned out, the ambulance crew resuscitated her 6 times, but it wasn't happening. And as we were to later find out, what actually killed my mum, there was nothing anyone could have done. The only thing that could have saved her was immediate surgery. And she was at home. Her chances of survival were poor enough in a hospital. Chances of survival, if it happens at home, were basically non-existent. So, my mum died and Dad was a mess. So we brought Dad up to stay with us for a while. We thought it would only be a couple of weeks. As it turns out, for one reason or another, my mum's death ends up going to a coroner. The whole process actually takes a lot longer, and it was the best part of 2 months before we were able to have the funeral. So from July throughout August and into early September, my dad was staying with us. And because my dad was not in the best state, and we'll get to that in a sec. Dad was not in the best state, so essentially I had to do all the organising, basically, for things like the funeral and getting the will sorted and all that jazz. So that's now done. As it turns out, we didn't obviously know it when we were planning it, but my mum's funeral actually took place on the same day that the Queen died. So it led to this slightly surreal moment where my dad got home after the funeral and saw in the news all this stuff about King Charles. And he just had a moment where he thought he was completely losing the plot. But no, the Queen had died, so there we go. As we found out at the time, it was actually during the wake for my mum, but regardless. So we stayed around with my dad for a while to help him sort out the house, because my parents over COVID had basically become hermits, and especially when my mum was ill, the house was just in a terrible state. We weren't able to do everything, but we were at least able to get the house back into a condition where maybe someone might actually choose to live there. So that's kind of occupied a chunk of our time up until relatively recently. And actually, as I speak to you, things associated with that are still clinking on in the background, but most of that stuff is done and dusted. There are other little things that happen during the period as well, but they're sort of the headline events, I suppose. So, as a family, we are up to, because there were other things that went on. So, as a family, we're up to 3 serious hospitalizations and 4 bereavements since that video in February, which is why I haven't been around very much. And you haven't heard hide nor hair from me for much longer than I had originally anticipated. So I don't really want to dwell on that anymore. Let's try and get onto things that are of slightly more pragmatic nature. So it actually, if I look at the time there, it actually seems that I was waffling on about that for rather longer than I intended, but there we go. And I just did want to say thank you for a number of people sent me some kind words and whatnot. So thank you for that. I appreciate your comments, and it's strange. It's weird to have a bunch of well-wishers that I've never met in person, but still think it appropriate to take the time to say to me they hope I'm doing all right, or, send some support. It is genuinely appreciated. So, on a more pragmatic note, what does that mean for Senior Channel that has just been sat in the background for a little while? Well, I am going to go back to trying to do videos. I'm not going to say it's going to be to any schedule, because frankly at the moment it's just whenever I can find the time and whenever I can put one out. Now, in terms of actual video content, things are probably going to change a little bit. The reality is I haven't played video games of any description in over a year at the time of recording this, which is now early October. So I'm not averse, don't get me wrong, I'm not averse to still showing people's World of Tanks replays and things like that, but I don't think it makes sense for me to continue making guides for a game that I'm completely out of touch with. That doesn't make sense to me. So you're still going to see, I should imagine, some World of Tanks content here or there, but I'm also going to shift some of it to focus on more of what I'm actually doing in my hobby time at the moment. And as I've insinuated or suggested in previous videos, more and more time, my hobby time, my free time, has been spent going back to war games, tabletop war games, miniature painting, painting historical vehicles, like airfix kits and things like that. And I've been trying to focus on, much like when I actually sort of first started putting videos on this channel, it was not meant for lots of people to watch, although they were welcome to. It was more my log of me trying to improve at a video game, and it's a similar kind of thing. I've been trying to put some effort into actually becoming better as a painter. And so when I was a teenager, I just used to bash models out just for the purposes, mainly for the purposes of playing a game with them. These days I actually take a lot more time and pleasure in the hobby side of things, I suppose. And so, with that being the case, I might start putting a couple of videos out that are just my experience of things I've done that I think have either contributed to a model looking good, or things I'm experimenting with, or hobby-related stuff in that way. The other things is I have thought about doing some history-focused videos, and actually I've thought of putting out, for years I've been thinking of putting out some more educational content, but we'll see how that goes. So there are still going to be videos appearing on the channel. I don't know what the frequency will be, and we'll see how we go. We'll just experiment with a few things, I suppose, and see how people find them. So what it does mean is if you are here just for that World of Tanks content, or when you originally subscribed, that will still be there, but it's not going to be the only thing that you see. So, it's, take it or leave it, take it as you want. There's no pressure from me for people to watch things or not. I don't want people to feel like watching videos is a chore. If you enjoy them, watch them. If you don't. It's kind of the way it's always been. I just make videos about my hobby time and put them online for fun, and that's always been the case, and hopefully that will continue to be the case. So with that in mind, let's kind of finish off this particular diatribe with having a look at some, at least, of what I have been up to recently-ish. So if you cast your minds back, at the beginning of the year, I was going to tinker around with what I called some hobby golf. The idea being to try and get some hobby-related things done, rather than just having an accumulated pile of shame in a variety of different contexts. And I showed you a couple of videos, models that I'd painted up. I think they were Chaos models, some Death Guard, Plague Marines, from Warhammer 40,000. And so I figured I would let you know what I did in the first quarter of this year. I was originally intending to do these kind of videos quarterly, so I thought I'd tag this one onto the end of this bit. So this is, I showed you some Plague Marines. This is going to be showing you what else I was working on until the end of March, or up until the end of March. So there were a few different things. Video games, I did not get any video games done. Videos, you'll have seen any videos that were published in that period. As I say, I think it was one in January and one in February so far this year, which is a little bit depressing, but there we go. And then books. Now, I'm not counting library books here because that's not stuff done from our personal stash, if you will. But nonetheless, I did actually get a book read in this period, and it's not a book you're probably expecting. It is, of all things, the Bible. I kid you not. So my logic here was, this is something I've wanted to do for a while. Regardless of whether you're religious or not, the Bible is one of those books that has been incredibly influential over the years for lots of people. So I wanted, rather than just hearing what people say about it secondhand, I wanted to actually read it for myself, form my own opinion, come to my own judgment. And so I did. So I read the Bible, and I finished it in March. Go me! It's, not something I would recommend. It's quite a chore to get through, not gonna lie. So what else have I been doing? Well, I was painting some miniatures, and a chunk of my time between January, February and March was actually spent painting some Dark Angel Tactical Marines from the Dark Vengeance starter set. Ended up with, 3 sets of this, model-wise, if we're looking at the Marine component. And this is for Warhammer 40,000. And by the end of March, I'd got all 30 of the Tactical Marines from that painted up. And so we're going to see a selection here. I'm not going to show you all 30 because these are single pose miniatures, and so there'd be a lot of repetition. But I'm going to show you a selection of them. And I think in this... No, I'm not going to show you every sculpt. That would be a lie. But you're going to see sort of the main categories. Now, bearing in mind, these images are obviously blown up quite a lot. I tried to, to actually see the miniature. Also, forgive the lighting a little bit. These pictures were not necessarily taken in the best lighting, but it's not too bad. So firstly, our Dark Angel Tactical Marine here. Now, I actually made some mistakes with these guys. My original intention was to undercoat them white, slap some Dark Angel's green contrast paint on them. Well, let me rephrase. Loki's initial intention, because these were going to be hers. Loki's initial intention was to then slap some Dark Angel's green contrast paint on them. And for anyone who doesn't know what contrast paint does, it's designed to, well, the original contrast paints anyway, are designed to sort of seep into the recesses, move away from the edges a little bit, and so it automatically does some edge highlighting for you. Now, this didn't go according to plan because we ended up with some mistakes, some overpainting from other colours, and so I ended up trying to fix it with some more Dark Angel's green. So what we actually ended up with was a quite dark Dark Angel's green covering that didn't really do the whole contrast thing. So I ended up having to try my hand at some edge highlighting, and these models are horrible for edge highlighting because just the edges tend to be quite soft and rounded and awkward to work with. And you can see here some of the edge highlights are a bit fat and messy, but nonetheless. So this is clearly a Space Marine, Tactical Marine with a bolt gun. Fine, it's a pretty standard sort of sculpt. I next included another Tactical Marine for you to see with a bolt gun, but who is a little different. So we've got this guy. In terms of basing, by the way, Loki had an idea of what she wanted for basing, so I just sort of went with it. And it's going for kind of, imagine sort of North York Moors or Dartmoor, that sort of thing. So that's what we were going with on the bases. Now I wanted to include this gentleman because what's obvious, or what's not often obvious with this particular sculpt from that box set, is that the left-hand side of his face, they always show pictures from this angle, and I've done the same, because the left-hand side of his face is kind of this melted mush. It's not a fault, it's just the way they've moulded this particular sculpt. So actually it's kind of ugly. So I've shown it from the good side. But if you see these sort of tactical marines around, there are loads of them. People bought loads of this box set. And it was because it was really good value for money. But there are some sculpting problems with them. They were trying out kind of detailed single pose plastic miniatures really for the first time. And yeah, there are problems with them. But nonetheless, managed to get most of this sculpt looking all right, even if I do say so myself. Next, we've got a guy with a big fat plasma cannon. He suffers from a similar kind of problem. It's not as obvious in this picture, but if you look at the two eyes, they're not the same. One of them is kind of, again, this melted mush. And it's not the best. But so there's a picture of Plasma Cannon Dude. I believe the next one is another picture of Plasma Cannon Dude, trying to give you a little bit more of the plasma cannon itself. I was trying an experiment with the coils, those blue coils you see on the plasma cannon here, to try and get some lighting, I suppose, going on them. It was kind of successful, but I think if I were doing it again, I would do it slightly differently, which is fine. It was experimenting. I spent a long time painting these guys because there was a lot of edge highlighting, which takes forever, which is a little frustrating. But not to worry. I was experimenting with these guys. I mean, a lot of this is experimentation and seeing what works and what doesn't. If I'm going to do these guys again now, I'd do them a little bit differently, and at some point I will have a bunch more to do, although not many more Dark Vengeance Tactical Marines at least. We've then also got a guy here with a plasma gun again. I was trying to play around with the coils to get them the plasma weapon coils here. So this isn't a solid blue paint. This is a white, then a blue wash or blue ink put over the top. Then in a sort of lighter blue, I've kind of tried to pick out the coils themselves and then gone in and picked out kind of little bits here or there with a white to try and get that kind of, make it look like bits of the coil are glowing, and it actually has come out okay. Again, I think I would do it a little differently if I were to do this again, or when I next paint some plasma weapons, but, you know, it came out alright in the end. I was relatively happy with how it turned out. We've also, of course, got Sarge here. I was struggling to paint faces. So, sorry. So, this guy's face, a little bit funky, not going to lie. You can see some of the detail there, but it didn't come out quite as I wanted. But nonetheless, like I say, I was experimenting. It's fine. The cloak came out quite nicely, I thought, with this particular gentleman. So there's that, hurrah. And once I'd painted all the tactical marines, have I got another picture of Sarge? Nope. I then painted a Necron Lord. Now, this guy is going back to 2nd edition. So, for those of you who know nothing about the game, Warhammer 40k, or 40,000, 2nd edition is way back in the dawny mists of time. Sort of the 90s, the mid-90s. 3rd edition came out in 97 or 98. So this is sort of the early to mid-90s this sculpt is from, which is probably why it looks a bit different. It's a metal model. The previous ones I showed you were plastic. And I was just playing around with some things there. So the blue cloaks here are a kind of dry brushed metal with a blue wash over the top to try and bring out the blue colour. And there are some bits that don't show up very well in the picture, that show up better in person, like the bronzy, coppery coloured trim on some bits of the sort of supposed cloth. But nonetheless, I thought he came out all right in the end. Certainly a lot better than when I'd painted a similar miniature when I was a teenager and starting to collect Necrons. So there we go. That was my hobby endeavours for that sort of first quarter of the year. I'll try and show you some other pictures at some point. Let me know what sort of things you guys would actually be interested in hearing about, those of you who do hobby bits yourself. You might find some suggestions about how to paint different effects useful, and obviously I'm not an expert I'm in painting by any stretch of the imagination. I would be interested to know what sort of things you guys do for the effects, any sort of hobby effects that you get. We may also, so in the new house, it's a 4-bedroom house, so we've kind of got a bedroom that is going to, at least for now, is going to be a games room. So we might actually be able to set up some board games and show those, which is something I spoke about a long time ago now, but was never able to find the time, opportunity, space, etc. to do so. So we've got a lot more space in this place. There's a lot of things we might be able to do. So by all means, let me know what you guys would be interested in seeing, and see what we can do. Might be able to do bits and bobs here or there. I also wouldn't mind maybe doing some, or showing people some kind of narrative-driven war games. We'll see what we can have time for, and all that jazz. So yeah, that's kind of all I wanted to say in this video. It's gone on a bit longer than I anticipated. Good lord, this is going to be like a 25-minute video or something. Not what I intended, but hey, I do waffle. I hope you guys at least found some bits of it interesting and probably have a bit more of an understanding of where we've been. It's been a bit of a rough 6 or 7 months, I'll be honest. But hopefully now the bulk of it's over and we can just focus on getting back to some degree of normality. That would be nice. Oh, almost forgot. I didn't give you the score from Hobby Golf. Yeah, the whole thing of this was doing a Hobby Golf thing. So by the scoring I'd been doing, which at the time, and I did remove this sometime later, but at the time it penalised me for not publishing videos. But anyway, so at the time, the cumulative score I was on by the end of March was -29. Remember, this is sort of a golf system, so we want a low score. Negative numbers are good. And I should probably mention, because this started in March, so one of the things that's going to slightly, not necessarily scupper this, but I'm slightly working against. So I had a friend of mine get in touch with me and say, I got a load of models that I'm getting rid of really cheap. Would you like some? And so I thought, I could get hold of a couple, mates rate sort of thing. I could get hold of a couple and that would be great. Asked Loki, how many of these am I allowed to get? Told her sort of the prices we were talking about, and she said, as many as you can. That wasn't what I was expecting. So there's going to be a bunch of models. We started organising this in March, but they didn't turn up until July, I think it was. Anyway, there's going to be a bunch of models that's going to count against me, so trying to get the best score that I can before that happens. Anyway, that's it. I'm going to stop talking now. Thank you very much for bearing with me. And thank you very much again for the well wishes. I genuinely do appreciate it. I'm now going to go and finish repairing a paint rack and then see if I can continue converting a Predator tank. And yeah, I hope you guys enjoy it. I hope you guys have had a better 6 or 7 months than I have. And I wish you good luck, good health. I'll catch you in another video. I don't know exactly when it will be, but fingers crossed, not another 7 months. Okay. Take care, everyone. Ciao, ciao.